Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Joe Vaclavik and Bob Utterback joining us again. Joe, when you look at the demand side, got some positive numbers when it comes to things like soybean demand. Still seeing strong demand fairly on the meats. But as you look at this strong U.S. dollar, are there any red flags that you're watching from the demand standpoint?
I think the dollar is different this year than it has been in the past. So typically strong dollar is bad for commodities, right? Well, the whole first 6 months of the year, the dollar rallied and commodities rallied simultaneously. I just don't know if I see the relationship this year. This is such a unique situation. The dollar's rallying because we're raising interest rates faster than anybody else is in the world. Is it negatively impacting exports to some extent? Maybe. But I don't know that it's like the make all be all force that maybe we thought it was prior to this whole mess that started with COVID back in 2020. I mean, it's like a different world now. I'm not reading as much into it as maybe I would have been 3 years ago, I guess.
Bob, do you agree with what Joe just said?
I think he's got some merit to what he's saying, but also I think the Ukrainian-Russian conflict getting more intense is probably adding to that anxiety of everybody in the global wanting to control a product. And they're saying, I want to get it regardless of the dollar. But eventually, the strong dollar is going to come in and bite us pretty hard as you get out there in 23, 24. And so that's going to be the real challenge for everybody is, paying these high prices for land, high cash rents, all the expenses come into the farmer. Farmers are going to say, hey, I now need $5.56. Is at what time does this come in these higher interest rates and the high dollar really come in and start to have negative effect? And I think it'll be latter part of 23, latter part of next year before we really come back to a normal type market. So yeah, we're in a strange time period. And strange time things will make strange bedfellows, but I would long-term not want to discount the impact of the strong dollar on exports. Just for this year, he's probably correct.
Well, on the livestock side of things, though, Joe, at the same time, we have these declining numbers. Right now, does USDA, do you feel like USDA has figured in how small this cattle herd is here in the U.S.?
I think people in the cattle business are waiting for USDA to reveal just how light the numbers are going to ultimately be. The market's already discounted this to some extent. I don't know to what extent. You've got big premiums in the deferred contracts when you get out to 2023. And the board actually perked up quite a bit this week, as did cash. So, I mean, it's a market that's got a really good story, I think. It looks like the boxed beef market's bottomed, at least for the moment. So it does have a good story. When is that story on paper? When does USDA print it? I don't know exactly, but it's out there. It's inevitable, I think, at this point.
Bob, you mentioned interest rates, but looking at the outside markets this week, looking at the action that it had, do you feel like the outside markets do think that we're going to continue to see a Fed rate hike? Is that guaranteed?
I think it is. And, I've heard stories of the food prices people are paying at the food counter increasing significantly. And I think that's going to be one of the impacts. Yes, cattle and hogs, I've been bullish because of the supply side. My anxiety is if this summer we have a cold winter and we start having high heat bills with high fuel prices, consumers are going to have to make hard choices between rent, gas for the car, fuel for the house. And I think that means they'll change their taste and preferences for the meats and go to the lighter cut meats and away from beef and pork and more to chicken. And so it is, again, it's a different time period. Some of the old rules don't apply, but I think we got to watch the consumer demand and the general economy. And I think the Fed, I hope we don't do what we did in 1978 through 1981, where the Fed moved slowly, increasing interest rates, and then realized they had to really hit the pedal to the metal and had to really crush it when Volcker came in. And that's my biggest anxiety, is that they don't move fast enough on interest rates to slow down the economy. And all of a sudden, it doesn't come back under control. And if we have 7.5%, 8% in the next 2 months, I think after the post-election, midterm elections, we could see a significant increase in interest rates through first half of next year, which almost guarantees a recession in the last half of 2022 and 23.
Okay, Joe, real quick, recession, though. I mean, we've talked about recession. We've seen the impact that it can have on commodity markets. But do you think there is a lot of downside risk still if that happens?
Yeah, commodity markets hate recessions. I'm actually really impressed with how well the corn markets acted, the soybean markets acted, the wheat markets acted. This could be a lot worse. I mean, we've seen big downdrafts in the stock market like this before, and it doesn't happen often. But sometimes, commodities will go along with it. We've seen crude oil really back off, and crude oil is kind of like, as far as I'm concerned, kind of like the bus driver of the commodity markets in general. But these grain markets are really sticky. I mean, this corn market in particular, you're still sitting like just south of $7, smack dab in the middle of harvest, staring recession in the face. I mean, that's a really impressive action when you really think about it, grand scheme of things.
All right, Bob, Joe, thank you for joining us this weekend. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report.